Join me, please, in lighting the chalice. Words are in your order of service. We like this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
As John begins to play, use this time to settle your hearts, to settle your spirits, quiet your mind as we enter into this time. Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of the Lowcountry. Those of you who are longtime members here know that you have found home. Those of you that are looking for home, you've just found one. And I hope that you are able to find that place here where you would be made to feel welcome and invited in an open-hearted way that you might be able to continue to follow your own path in this world. I thank you for taking the opportunity to be here and be a part of that. John, thank you for that introduction and to settle our spirits. I do appreciate the gifts that you bring into this place. Again, my name is Charlie Tyler. I'm one of the pastoral ministers here at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of this Lowcountry. And I also am pleased to know that Dick and Molly Hood are back with us. I know we've already acknowledged you, but it's good to see you, Dick. Welcome back. Maine has been good to you. I want to take the opportunity now to make sure that guests and visitors are acknowledged. It's a thing that we do is if you're here for your first or second time and are willing to stand where you are and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, that way we get to know you just a little bit more. We promise not to bug you, but we do want to love you. So if you would please, anybody on my right that's first or second time guests or visitors? And in the middle section, first or second? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm visiting. I'm actually from Asheville. We just actually moved to Asheville 2 weeks before the hurricane. So we evacuated to my cousin, so we've been Hilton Head. They've been very gracious. Luckily, we're very lucky. Our housing development is safe and intact, and we're just waiting for water to return. So thank you for having this here for me to come to. It's nice to connect to a UU congregation here in Homestead.
Yes, and we'll be supporting you. I'm glad you have found this as refuge, and we will continue to be supporting the work in Western North Carolina. Anybody else that's in the middle? On my far left? So thank you for being here and being a part of this. My prayer is that as we gather together, as we find the strength that comes from each other and the hope that comes from each other as we walk this journey together. I do bring you greetings from St. Petersburg and Clearwater, Florida, where I was last weekend. Most of it is still there, but not all of it. And some of you know that Clearwater is my birthplace, and so I am wounded to know the pains and the destruction and the devastation that has settled into that area. And we had a chance to see a good bit of it in the St. Petersburg area as well, too. And I know that we will continue to be holding each other in the light as we gather our strength together moving forward. There's a number of announcements I need to make today. So bear with me, if you will. I'll try and do my best not to forget anything. There is a transition workshop. You'll see this information out there somewhere that is being held this coming Sunday. No, today. Will be after the talkback, 6 sessions on the transitions and what it feels like to be in transition in your life. Ann Harrison is leading this, and so if you have questions for her, she's waving down front. She's got a little bit of Pentecostal in her right there for just a moment. Hands in the air, we love that. We love that. So if you have questions about that, or I've gone by too fast, just talk with her, and she'll set you straight. We also have a homecoming dinner on Saturday the 19th here at 6 o'clock. We'll be greeting all of us that will be coming back down from the north as they settle in here in their true home. And we'll be having a chili, cornbread, salad, and dessert. We encourage you to make one or all of those things and bring them to this gathering together, something of a homecoming welcome back party. The sign-up is in the lobby, and I hope that you'll be able to go by there. If you have any questions, see Lynn Nordenberg. Lynn, wave your hand, and she'll make sure that she gets you to the right piece of paper to sign. There is, from Zeke Hansel, don't know how many of you know Zeke. If you are interested in seeing and learning about a voter suppression seminar, see me, and I will get you that information. It's coming up next week, and I think some of you might be interested in taking part in that. I also want to draw your attention to the October 13th collection, the Share the Plate, to support the UU congregations affected and afflicted by Hurricane Helene. And I do want to underscore this particular announcement to ensure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. We need to let everyone know the following, that all cash donations will automatically go to the Disaster Relief Fund unless they are designated in an envelope for another purpose, that all check donations for the Disaster Relief Fund must be payable to UUCL along with the notation disaster relief. Otherwise, we will not be able to know if it's a pledge payment or other regular donations. If you have more questions, Pat, where are you? Patricia? Yes.
Surely it happens today. This happens today.
Okay, all right, that happens today.
Yeah.
Today's the 13th. No, it's not. Wow, that's what happens when I take a Sunday off. Today's the 13th, and you need to make your donations today. Thank you for that. That whole dose of reality is always embarrassing. If you would, please. Thank you, Leslie.
On behalf of the conductor of our peace train, Diane Valeri, who is on a very special birthday travel weekend, I want to thank everyone for participating in 30 days and 30 ways in 30 days, 30 acts of kindness. Don't forget that we've got the forms in the lobby near the door. The box is there. Reward yourself with the stars and the hearts stickers. But I want to share one thing that we've discovered amongst ourselves. You people are doing acts of kindness anyway as a way of life. And so it's fun to record them, but keep up the good work. Keep rewarding yourself with acts of kindness and others. And thank you for participating.
Thank you, Leslie. And if some of you are curious about what that announcement was all about, go see her. She'll catch you up to date. Thank you, Leslie. Are there any other announcements that I've forgotten? I'm sure there are. Okay, I want to welcome into this place Katherine Seeber. Katie brings her knowledge and her expertise in archaeology and deepening the understanding of it in a social action way. And I'm looking very much forward to hearing what Katie has to share. Some of you know that archaeology has been a passion of mine over the years, and so we talk the same language. As a matter of fact, we almost didn't get out of the lobby this morning to come start here. We're going to be here till noon. But it's a pleasure to have Katie with us. I'm going to ask if Dr. Katherine Seeber would please come and have our opening words.
Good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
I am so thrilled to be here to speak with you all today. It is my honor and is my pleasure to educate and talk about Indigenous people and their incredible past, future, present. We live in a place full of very deep history, and so I'm excited to speak with you all about that today. I am an archaeologist, as Charlie said, but also I'm an anthropologist. I'm a person who studies human beings by looking at the things that we do in groups. And so it's not looking at one person individually, it's looking at different ways in which we as communities live and how that affects our lives. I'm originally from Appalachia. I'm from rural West Virginia. I'd give you the name of my town, but you have not heard of it. And I've spent the last 20 years traveling across the southeast of the United States doing archaeology and learning all about different people and different ways of life. And I currently live here. I've lived here for about 10 years, on and off. I did excavations on Hilton Head and then ended up staying, as many of us have done in the past. And I specialize in communicating what I do. So if we have scientists in the crowd, or if anyone has ever known a scientist in the past, potentially it was hard to understand what they were saying or doing when they were talking about it. And it is my joy to talk to people about science in a way they understand. Because the world around us is incredible. It is brilliant, it is beautiful, it is inspiring in every way. And science is that. It is the study of the ways in which the world is brilliant. And so to understand it, you have to be communicated with in an interesting, fascinating way. So that's what I get to do every single day. Well, most days. I work from home, so a lot of it's with my cats. I'm excited to have you all here today, and I think that you're going to get a lot of joy out of learning more about the deep history here. But just the very first thing I want to say is the people who lived here before Spanish got here, the name of the people is one that most people don't know. It's Escamacu. Escamacu. I'm going to do it one more time, and you'll hear it a bunch more. Escamacu. That is the name of the group of people who lived where you live now. And there's a long history before and a long history after. But the one thing, when I see you later in the world, that I want you to know is the name of these people, Escamacu. Escamacu. And I'll tell you what it means and all the other good stuff. But that's my opening, and I'm very excited to be here.
And now for the third time this week, this song crosses my path. Turn with me, if you will, to hymn number 16. And maybe gather our hearts together for "'Tis a Gift to be Simple." Maybe stand and sing together, please.
On behalf of the Sandalwood Food Pantry and Bluffton Self-Help, we thank you for your continued support in providing non-perishable items. We welcome your weekly donations that we place on the table in the back of the sanctuary. To support the work that we do within the walls of this beloved community and beyond, we will now offer the baskets for your contributions. Those of you who are visitors with us today, please allow the basket to pass. Your presence is our gift. curiosity.
This is the time we share our joys and concerns. If you have a joy, we're happy with you. And if you have a concern, it's our pleasure to comfort you. And this sharing binds us closer together. So if you wish to come forward and share, come and take a stone from the basket. Tell us who you are. No political, no announcements of any kind, please. And then after you're done, put your stone in the can.
So my name is Charlie Tyler. I want to remind us that we're continuing to find ways to acknowledge and remember those children lost to gun violence. We're still struggling with the best way to acknowledge that. There are some stones, small stones in the basket up here. Those of you, some of you, many of you are carrying those stones from several weeks ago. If you don't have one, you're welcome to pick one up. I have a stone that actually Trexler gave me that I continue to carry with me on a regular basis. And so just remember that and remember the losses that are there. And so I just want to draw that to your attention. Thank you.
I feel like I could take a whole bunch of these because this doesn't even equal the children that we have lost. I saw Jim and Jan Weston yesterday. Brian and I brought balloons over and some food and so forth and so on. She's really having a tough time. She'd love to be here. She especially wanted to be in the after meeting for transitions because they are certainly going through that, but she cannot leave him right now. Just to let you know, some more cards. If you even call and say, if you feel comfortable enough to go over there and see what time, she knew it was 5:30, he would be okay, and so forth and so on. And she was saying he's not really, he'll fall asleep or this or that. He was full of life. So I think the visiting and so forth brought joy to him. And it brought joy to us, but a great deal of sorrow too, because it's really tough. He's kind of depressed and doesn't see value in doing the PT and so forth. And you can quite understand that. But I gave him a bad time. So he's going to do it. But this is from all of us.
Okay. Can I put it in? We can, this side.
Right over here?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kathleen, and it's great to be back from the north. We had a great 3 months, 4 months, I guess. I don't know how many months. Like Charlie, I forget what day it is. We had the fullness of life this summer. We had a new baby granddaughter born in May, and we got to meet her in whatever month that was, June or July. And so we had birth. We lost a family member at 61 to the terrible disease that kills so many, alcoholism and organ failure. So we had a death. And we had a wedding. And it brought us to Michigan, the upper part of Michigan, not the Upper Peninsula, but we didn't know anything about Michigan, so we got to learn a lot about Michigan. This wedding was in Northport, for those of you from the Midwest. So our hearts are full. It's a bittersweet time for us, but we're just thrilled to be back. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tom Brown, and I have like a double joy. We spent the past week with our grandson who came from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it was just, he's 15, and it was just delightful. He loves the ocean, and we had a great time playing games and going to the ocean, etc. And then we had to take him back to the airport, and he was going to be an unaccompanied passenger. And it turned out that the flight connection in Dallas wasn't going to work out, so we made another arrangement to come back early the next morning, and where the connection would be better. That was the airport's recommendation. So we started back home, figuring we'd get up very early to bring him back. And on the way back home, something was in the road, and we hit it. And it disabled the car. The front bumper came off and was dragging, and it went up underneath the car and ripped the bottom. Nothing mechanical, but we couldn't really drive it with all that stuff hanging off. So we pulled over to the side, and we were trying to get a hold of AAA, which seemed a long, lengthy process. When up came a tow truck behind us, and I thought it was an independent tower looking for work, and it turned out not to be that. It turned out to be an organization sponsored by the state of Georgia. And this happened in Port Wentworth, Georgia, about mile marker 110. It was almost at the end. So, but anyway, he said that it was a service of the state of Georgia called CHAMP. And if it's on an interstate and you have a problem, and he just happened to come along and see us and stop, if you have a problem, you dial 511, and they'll come to your aid and do whatever they can. They have there's a mechanic there, and he was able to get this piece that was hanging off the car so he could drive it. So, well, it turned out that we got a motel, and because we were a little cautious about driving it, even though it was drivable. And so we were able to get our grandson to the airport early the next morning, and he made it back to Albuquerque, and everything was fine. But my joy really was for the service of the organization called CHAMP. So if you're ever in Georgia, which is often, I'm sure, and you're on Interstate 95 or one of the other interstates, then you break down, call 511, and hopefully it'll show up.
My name is Lynn. Last week I told you that my neighbor Marv had a large tumor on his pancreas, and I asked for you to keep him in your hearts. Well, today is a joy. It turns out that he has treatable lymphoma, and he's still at MUSC, and they're beginning chemotherapy today or tomorrow. So thank you for your holding him in your hearts.
Hi, I'm Arnie Baker, relatively new member. There's two words that my parents imbued upon our family, and was called thank you. I need to give you a little anecdote first. I was in the lobby of McDonnell Douglas, and I had helped an executive rise to become a vice president. He came up to me and said, "Arnie, how are you doing?" I said, "Not too good, Roger. I'm 56 years old, 2 children in college, and a wife with MS. And I've got word from friends that I may be laid off." Roger said, "Arnie, go back to your desk." An hour later, I got a call, and Roger went to bat and provided a job for me for the foreseeable future. Weeks later, I saw Roger again. Big, tall guy, 250 pounds, 6'4". I looked up into Roger and said, Roger, I just wanted to say thank you. And Roger said, your only obligation, Arnie, is to do something nice for someone else. And there's 2 members of the congregation, not that everybody else has been wonderful. And Dave and Kathleen welcomed us at their home and provided food and beverage, and I want to say thank you.
Hi, I'm Joanne, and I've been missing for a couple of months, and I just want to say that I feel very lucky and blessed to have this congregation emailing me, sending cards, shouting out at services. It really made me feel special. And my thoughts about if I ever have to move away from here is I don't want to leave you guys. So thank you all.
Now, if you'll all look in your hymnal for affirmation, number 437, while you do that, I'm going to put 2 stones in the cairn for the joys and concerns left unspoken. Let's read these together. Let us worship with our eyes and ears and fingertips. Let us love the world through heart and mind and body. We feed our eyes upon the mystery and revelation in the faces of our brothers and sisters. We seek to know the wistfulness of the very young and the very old, the wistfulness of people in all times of life. We seek to understand the shyness behind arrogance, the fear behind pride, the tenderness behind clumsy strength, the anguish behind cruelty. All the life flows into a great common life if we will only open our eyes to our companions. Let us worship not in bowing down, nor with closed eyes and ears. Let us worship with the opening of all the windows of our beings, with the full understretching of our spirits. Life comes with singing and laughter, with tears and confiding, with a rising wave too great to be held in the mind and heart and body to those who have fallen in love with life. Let us worship and let us learn to love.
Now I invite Dr. Katherine Seeber to bring us her message for today. If you would please, Dave.
All right, I'm tall, so can everybody hear me well?
Yes.
All right. That was very beautiful affirmation. All right, so I just want you to know that I could stand here for probably 8 hours and orate the entire history of ancient Native America. But I have about 20 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I am seeking to inspire more learning about the indigenous people of the Americas today by telling you the story of how scientists and anthropologists and archaeologists now believe indigenous people came to where the Americas are. Because it's fascinating and it's very different than probably what you remember learning as a young person, and it's incredible to think about the depth of history. So I'm going to tell you a story. Everybody settle in, get into your minds, because we're going back to the Ice Ages. Right? So, behind me you see the slide saying the Ancient Ones. This is a group of people who had been here already for a very long time. So before 10,000 years ago, there was people here. When we were younger in school, we often learned that Native Americans walked across something called the Bering Strait to get to the United States, right? People remember that? That is incorrect. It was a good guess with science, but it was not correct. And it didn't factor in any of the stories and the history that Indigenous people were saying was their history. It was solely what some scientists thought was the best case scenario based on landscape and water, and that's fine. But now we know it's quite different. So, I'm going to go back to the beginning of humanity, and all humans come from Africa. We're coming at this from a scientific point of view. All human beings were created first in Africa in a place called Olduvai Gorge. That's what we know so far. That was a very long time ago. About 300,000 years. It's difficult to think about time in that scale, but it's a long time ago. About 100,000 years ago, or around that time, human beings started to walk out of what is now Africa and migrate across the world. Now scientists can use things like genetics and archaeology and anthropology and listening to Indigenous people when they speak to form a new way of understanding how humans moved across the world. So as humans moved across from Africa, they eventually, some humans got into Asia, and about, we think, 50,000 years ago, which again is a very long time, there was human beings living in what is now Japan, China, the South Pacific, who were having entire cultures based on watercraft. So we know that human beings got to Australia at least 40,000 years ago, and Australia is an island, right? So human beings had to have had boats by 40,000 years ago. I know this is a long time ago, but it's key to think about that as a piece of information. So as human beings are in this very ancient time becoming very adept at watercraft, they're exploring. Has anybody here ever seen the movie Moana? Oh, excellent. If you haven't, it's homework. And I only say that because it is the best illustration and adaptation of what I'm talking about. For many, many, many generations, human beings in what is now the Pacific, along the Asian coast, were exploring the Pacific Ocean with catamarans, with watercraft, and they're going from island to island. Otherwise, we would have nobody in Hawaii, right? We'd have nobody in Polynesia. So we know now, based on that set of scientific facts and archaeology that happened along the Pacific coast of North America, that using boats, Native Americans eventually got to what is now the North America and South America Pacific coast probably around 40,000 years ago, which is a really long time. It's probable that what happened is, if you look at a map of the Pacific Ocean, which I don't have here because we don't really need it, there is a shallow sea. It's only about 100 feet deep, and it's around the top of the Pacific Ocean. It goes up near Russia and Antarctica, and it was something that used to be the Great Kelp Forest. Kelp is a seaweed, and it grows to be 100 feet tall, and so for hundreds of thousands of years, this shallow sea was an underwater forest, full of porpoises and dolphins and all sorts of things that are easier to eat than mammoths. Right? We had several ice ages a long time ago, and so it's our hypothesis that human beings who have always been very brilliant figured out how to hunt in the water, and over a period of time, as animals migrated across every year the Great Kelp Sea, human beings naturally were following where these animals are going, right? That is our best interpretation and probably very accurate version of how Native Americans first got here. And so that's important because that means the depth of Indigenous history here is just as deep as Indigenous history or people's history anywhere else. There used to be a false narrative that Native Americans had just sort of gotten here and they were very behind in technology because they got here so late and everywhere else in the world had a longer start. None of that is true or accurate. So, about 40,000 years ago, people start to move across what is now North America. They first come in through California on the Pacific side, also Argentina and Chile in South America, also across what is now Mexico. The Rio Bravos or the Rio Grande, the river that separates the US and Mexico, used to also be a shallow sea. So you could take your catamaran straight across it, you'd end up in the Gulf of Mexico, and the oldest archaeological sites in what is now North America occur on the coast of California, and then South Carolina, Georgia, and Louisiana. That's odd. For a long time, there was like scientists trying to piece together some stuff. They were trying to force it. They're like, well, maybe they just walked real fast across the middle. That's not true. That's because that's where the Mississippi River and the Savannah River are. And so human beings move across the shallow sea, and in their watercraft start going all the way up the different river systems on the East Coast. So along the Mississippi River and along the Savannah River, we've got ancient sites. One of the sites that we had talked about earlier, Charlie and I, is Topper. It's 40,000 years old, and it is only just right up the river in Allendale, South Carolina. That's how I ended up here as a scientist from the middle of the mountains, because archaeology here is quite ancient. That means history here is quite ancient. So I've included this slide for us to look at because it's important to think about Indigenous people for all of Indigenous history in the Americas as water people. We use roads now as our way of getting across the land, which really separates us from the world around us, especially because we're zooming in cars. But imagine all your life, every single day, anytime you needed to get somewhere, your first go would be through water. And that was true for most humans, but especially here, right? So we know on the coast of South Carolina, we've got all these beautiful estuaries full of all sorts of food that you can literally go grab, right? Oysters, clams, mussels, shrimp, all sorts of fish, all sorts of berries, all sorts of things. This is what we call a really temperate climate. For those of us who have moved here from a place with snow, we very much know it is easier to eat here all year from the land than it would be from New York or Quebec, right? Right, so here, in the ancient times, we have a lot of human beings about 10,000 years ago in this area living as what we used to call hunter-gatherers, but that's not a real word either because that makes it seem like hunting was very important. It's really gatherer-hunting people. Gatherer-hunters, gatherers-hunterers. Gathering first, hunting second, because hunting was a supplement. But when we started doing archaeology, men were really excited about the hunting thing. So it's really gathering most of your food with a little bit of hunting on the side. As people are moving across the landscape, it would be seasonal, and we all know sort of about that. So you know that all blueberries don't grow in one day, right? Blueberries where it's warmer grow, and then blueberries where it's colder. So in this ancient time, most human beings in communities of probably 30, 40 people are making a circle throughout different landscapes all year round, every year. And the circle would be like from here to maybe Columbia or what is now Asheville. It's a big circle, right? But about 4,000 years ago, which is when the Great Pyramids of Egypt were built, so we can do the timeline, we start seeing these things called shell rings. The first map was a map showing all those locations of shell rings. The second one was 2 shell rings that I've studied, and this is a very incredible piece of art showing a shell ring that I did very quickly, and it's pretty bad, so sorry. But shell rings occur along the east coast of what is now North America, from South Carolina down to Florida, but they also occur in Cuba. They also occur across the top of Brazil. They occur in Trinidad, Tobago, Guatemala, Honduras, in Nicaragua. Because if you scale back and look at the earth, it's a circle. That area of the world is a very neat little packaged circle where people were continuously in their boats moving around, right? I can't go to Havana to study shell rings. I've attempted it in real life, and I was told no, but I did do it here. So I spent years working on the sea pine shell ring and many other shell rings, and again, I could talk to you for 100 hours about that, but essentially, they are the sites of ancient villages. So these shell rings are monumental structures built solely out of oysters, and sometimes mussels, that were built over time through human beings gathering, which I think is amazing. So, just like us, gathering has always been important to all human beings. It's one of the things that make us people. So, the humans who lived here a few times a year, everyone would come together and have a feast, maybe for some sort of solstice, maybe for some sort of celestial event, maybe a seasonal thing, and have a 3 or 4 day feast where hundreds of people are there. And as they're having this feast, oysters are the predominant thing that people eat. They're super easy. You just go pull them out of the ground. You can feed hundreds of people at a time. And then they're deposited very intentionally in a perfect circle. Through archaeology, we know that all the shell rings are built in a period of about 100 years. All year round, there was probably 3 or 4 families who lived in the shell ring and took care of it. And then a few times a year, there'd be a lot of people. So you're living in a place where for the very first time in North America, human beings who had spent 30 to 40,000 years traveling all year round decided, I'm going to stay here all year. They invented villages. So the very first villages, the very first time humans decide, I'm going to stay in one place all year, is where you live. Which I think is pretty beautiful because we all sort of decided that unless you're actually from here. It came along with lots of other amazing things. This is just an example. As people are settling these early villages, they also invent pottery. So the oldest pottery in North America, the oldest clay pots, are from here. They're from Hilton Head, they're from Beaufort, they're from Effingham County, Chatham, the Savannah River Valley. That's one of the other reasons I'm here. It is an incredible invention that changes Indigenous lives. Think about the ways in which having a way to store your food would change your life without one before. Ceramics are really, really important to all Indigenous people in the Americas, past, present, and future. This is a traditional potter working in what is now, I think, Chihuahua or Sinaloa, but it's in somewhere in Mexico because they're still making pots the traditional way. And I included it because it's important to think about the ways in which Indigenous culture is still happening every single day all around us. So one of the main ways that archaeologists understand the past is through the things that we leave behind, right? So I can't telekinesis what people were thinking in the past. I have to use the things they leave in the ground. And ceramics don't disappear, they stay. So I can look at them and think about the ways in which past people were using them, the drawings that they put on them, the decorations, the way they make them. Is it made with a paddle like this? Is it a cord? Oh my. All of these things tell me more about the people who made them. And they tell me that ancient people here were pretty ingenious. The reason I had Spanish moss on the last slide is because ancient people figured out that if you put just straight clay in a fire to try to turn it into a pot, it will explode. You have to include something to help disperse the heat. Modern potters use something called grog. It's like a mixture of sand and other broken clay. They use Spanish moss, which helps disperse the heat and create a very solid clay pot. And you can see little squiggles in it. We have sound effects for children. I couldn't turn it off. I'm sorry. So, as human beings are here for a few thousand years, villages become slightly bigger, and about 1,000 years ago, human beings in the southeast enter a period of time that we call the Mississippian. And this is only important because it's an archaeological word, but this is the period of time that most people associate in history with what we think about Native Americans in the past, with big headdresses, with lots of decorations, with lots of things on their bodies. This is what most people interpret to be the Native American past. But it's important to think about, this took 4,000 years to get here, right? Because 2000 BC is 4,000 years ago, right? So in the Mississippian period, which is about 1,000 years ago until Europeans arrive, the human beings that lived here started really organizing themselves into people, communities that we can recognize today. And this map shows that organization. Just like everybody else in the world, Indigenous people organized themselves in a way that was language-based. So we have nation states, and we have borders, and we have things that define us based on our zip codes. But for most of human history, it's our language, right? And so the way that most Indigenous people living and in the past organize themselves and recognize themselves is where they're from, including the language that's spoken there. So you can see the different languages here, they're color-coded, and you can see Esquimalt. So the people that lived on the Sea Islands from what is now Charleston to about Hilton Head were a group of people all together. It was several different communities, so all the purple ones are related, right? And so these group of people together is what a lot of people call the Orista. It's maybe a word you've heard of before, or it's like sometimes there's a street that's Orista Street, but that is the larger group of people, and then all of the ones in purple are the names of communities who lived here for at least 1,000 years before Europeans got here. They are directly related to the people before them, but this is when we say coalesced, came together. So you probably know some of these names, like Kiowa, Stono, Edisto, Cumbie, Ashpoo, Kusavo. Those are the names of our rivers now. They're the names of some of our islands, because that's who lived here before. So this group of people spoke a language group called Arawak, which is the same group of languages that people in Indigenous Puerto Rico and Indigenous Cuba and all sorts of parts in the Caribbean spoke, because they're all related. It's the same language basis also that some people spoke in what is now Guatemala and the Yucatan Peninsula. So when you're done here, look at a map of the Caribbean and it'll make sense. You can see there's lots of other groups of Indigenous people. We've got Catawba, which is the only group of people in South America or in South Carolina that the federal government recognizes as being Indigenous now. But we also have Cherokee, Yuchi, Westos, Yamasee. You've probably maybe heard the word Yamasee before. That's the one that everyone thinks is the people who lived here before Europeans, but that's not true. And the Wale is in Port Wentworth area. So this is a drawing of when French people came here in 1564 and were fascinated by Indigenous people. You can see that they have tattoos. You can see their hair is very different. You can see that the women here are wearing Spanish moss across themselves as a little sash. The colors are European imagination. So there is lots of periods of time in which Europeans came here. They came here in the 1500s, the 1600s, and the 1700s. But in general, the first people that were here were Spanish and French. They came here from the Caribbean, and they were trying to extend their empires, and we all know this story. But essentially, the people who lived here, the Esquimalt, did not have a great time with that. There was a really intense war called the Esquimalt War that was fought here on Hilton Head and in other places in the 1500s. And that is the beginning of of what we call colonization here. But that isn't the end of the Escamacu. There's a long story that happens. So it's important to think about colonization beginning in 1521, because that's a lot earlier than a lot of people understand. So Europeans came here 500 years ago. That's a long period of time, and it's a long period of adjustment, right? These are some more drawings of what people who lived here were doing and eating and how they were dressing. These are also from French explorers. This one over here, you can see this is what we now understand as barbecue. I don't know if everybody knows this, but barbecue is a Native American invention. So if you ever had it, you can thank Indigenous folks. When Europeans got here, they saw lots of Native folks skewering meat and slow roasting them like this, or roasting them in pits, and that had not been something they had seen before, and it became really popular. And it is one of the things in the South that we are known for, because Indigenous people down here, this is what they were doing. So you can see, we don't really barbecue alligators anymore, but they did. Here in the middle, we've got planting, so you can see that they are planting all sorts of different crops, because Indigenous people here grew all sorts of things, including most of the food that we associate now with modern food is indigenous, like tomatoes and potatoes and coffee and tobacco and all these different types of things were here and then were exported out. So these people are planting what we now call onions. And then over here we've got an interpretation of gathering. So their gathering periods is basically when people go into the natural world and gather mostly hazelnuts. Hazelnuts and chestnuts was a very, very, very important source of protein for Indigenous people for their entire time here, 4,000 years or more. One of the things that I think is amazing is there is no animals that are used for milk in the Americas, well, North America, before Europeans. Nobody was milking anything here. But they did have a version of that, and that was hazelnut milk. So Native people in the Americas, especially in the Southeast, were milking chestnuts and hazelnuts for the last few thousand years. They were really current with the way that they were doing it. We all now have nut milk of every variety, but they had it before, and I just think that that's very ironic. And so you can see they've got all sorts of things that they're bringing in from the wild. When Europeans encountered this, they thought it was really childish. They were like, they're not organized. They just walk into the woods and pick things up. What idiots. It's good that we're here to help. But in reality, we understand that for thousands of years, Indigenous people here were working within an ecosystem. They learned the ways in which the ecosystems here worked and integrated themselves so that they were part of a continuous cycle of care and nurturing, because they knew that if you overextend your environment, you don't have any more resources. But it was also a very sacred and spiritual thing. It is not separate in the Indigenous world. I think one of the most fascinating and important aspects of all of this is to understand where Indigenous people came from, because now we separate people out into our boxes quite frequently, right? Currently, only 1.5% of the American population is Native American. That is based on United States federal government rules. That is not based on community orientation. You have to have a certain amount of blood that you can prove using ancestry and genetics, and you have to send in your application, and the federal government says, okay, you are Indian enough. And you can lose that status, which means you can't participate in your community anymore. There's 576 currently recognized Native American reservations in the United States. So Native American reservations are basically tiny little nations inside a nation. They're called sovereign nations. It's supposed to mean that they are independent.
That is not true. Most of them, when they were created, had an agreement with the United States government that in exchange for not leaving the reservation, they would get regular types of investment from the government, which is now what we associate with like things like tax breaks or things like that. That is also not what's happening, but that was how the agreement happened in the beginning. So 576 reservations. There's only one reservation in South Carolina. It's the Catawba Reservation, but you've probably, depending upon where you're from, been driven through, been proximately close to one, and might have not even known it. Like, for example, the state of New York has 11 reservations. That's a lot. One of them is on Long Island. Did anybody know that? Crazy, right? Yeah. So, of those 576 active reservations, that's only people who choose to live at home. There's Indigenous people in every city and in every town, especially across places that were not displaced like the Southeast. If you remember, we had a little incident called the Trail of Tears here, which removed a lot of Southeastern Indigenous people. But one of the interesting and important things that I always want to communicate is that Indigenous people in the Americas are all related to one another, right? So an Indigenous person from Honduras, their ancient ancestors are the same people who came to South Carolina. They split off, and one went south and one went north, but it's the same groups of people, right? So Indigenous people in Mexico or in Brazil or all the way down in Chile originally are all from the same groups of people. And I know that from science, like genetics. I know that from culture, from archaeology, but I also know that because I know a lot of Indigenous people. And there is many commonalities between Indigenous people in Central America, South America, and North America. Here in North America, we have a lot less Native people because a lot more people were exterminated. And that's a very upsetting thing to say, but it is true. In Central and South America, a lot more Indigenous people survived. So, if you've been out in public in Beaufort County recently, you might have noticed we have a burgeoning Latino population that is full of people from Central and South America. And when I teach in schools here, over the last few years, I have encountered a situation in which a lot of my youngest pupils do not speak English, right? So in Beaufort County schools, about 30% of our kids don't speak English, they only speak Spanish. I'm bilingual, so I can teach them, but a lot of the teachers can't. And they get a lot of flack, right? So when I'm teaching, I always want to make sure that the students in that classroom, whether they are Latino, whether they are white, whether they are Gullah Geechee, whoever they are, understand that Hispanic kids are Native American. They are Indigenous, right? And so when we're talking about current issues that happen in the world, we always talk about how important it is to help Indigenous people, right? We're always like, we really need to help those Native Americans. And that includes all Indigenous people, including the Indigenous people who have arrived here from other places they were Indigenous to. And it's important because a lot of kids don't understand that there is not a difference between Indigenous people in what is now Nicaragua versus what is now South Carolina. And one of the coolest, most amazing things that I get to do is when I'm doing excavations at a very ancient site that's like 4,000 years old, which happens quite frequently, I'll be doing it this week, and I have students on that site with me. If they are from a group of people in Central America or South America who are Indigenous, I get to say, you're probably the first person that's been on this site that's related to these people in thousands of years. Because your ancestors were here. And that is a powerful thing, especially potentially for a group of people who are continuously made to feel unwelcome. So I thought today, in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day, we would learn a new version of how people got here. I know we got a little academic, but
You invited literally an archaeologist, so sorry. I also wanted you to learn that there's groups of people who've been here for thousands of years and are still here. I wanted you to learn that the American government has a classification system of current living Native American people, and it continues to affect their lives every single day. There is large groups of people and issues that happen that are specifically indigenous. Like, for example, there's an entire movement of things known as the missing and murdered indigenous women, because indigenous women are so much more likely to go missing or be murdered that they need to have a federal program to protect them. I donate money to them all the time because it's a very worthy cause, but the statistics are pretty upsetting. Indigenous children are routinely taken out of homes at a much higher rate. Indigenous languages are continuously endangered. And if you don't have your federal Indian status card, you are usually not acknowledged as Indigenous, even if your parents are both Native. And also blood quantum isn't real, right? Like, you could grow up with a grandparent that's from a place that they haven't been to and still say you're Irish American. But if you have a grandparent that's Indigenous, that might not be true for the federal government. I also wanted you to learn and to think about the ways in which every day you interact with Indigenous people in this county and in this place. And it's an exciting thing because I think when we move to a new place, sometimes we don't feel quite rooted to that place. We don't know the topography, we don't know the plants and the animals the same way we knew the places we grew up. But learning more about the people that came here before us and spent their lives and generations here helps us be more in tune and more connected to this world that we live in. So I just wanted to make sure that at the very end of this, we say one more time the name of the people who lived here before Spanish came, and it is Escamacu. Right, Escamacu, exactly. And just to break it down, Macu is sort of the same as Miko. It's a word that means kind of like chief, but not quite. And it's the name of the principal town, Escamacu. So with that, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that the Escamacu were here before us, that some of them and their ancestors still exist. They live in a place called Moncks Corner, South Carolina, and that we're all very grateful and excited to learn more about the way the Indigenous world shaped Beaufort County before we got here.
Thank you, Dr. Seeber. Carol Stevens, if you would begin to make your way up front. Our closing hymn is going to be Amazing Grace, that is sung in Cherokee. Fortunately, we have Carol Stevens who can sing it in Cherokee and lead us with it. So if you would please take those words in your hands. They're in the bulletin.
By way of introduction, I lived and worked in Cherokee, North Carolina, several years ago. And I had the good fortune to make a good friend with a Cherokee woman who was in her 80s, who lived in the same quadruplex on the reservation. And she taught me lots of things, but she talked about wanting to go back to West Virginia, to this coal mining town, to make donations. And I was really stunned that the Cherokee, even though the tribe is well off, and these were days before they had so much money from the casino, didn't have a whole lot, really. And yet they made these journeys to coal mining towns to make donations. And I was very moved by that. I took her one time. She lamented that she couldn't go anymore because she couldn't drive, so I took her. And a small group of us stood up and sang Amazing Grace to those folks in Cherokee. So this is very close to my heart. Okay, shall we?
Why don't you walk through it first without the music, maybe? Just explain what the people need to read.
Oh, I have the Cherokee pronunciation as it's written in Cherokee. Well, it's not the Cherokee alphabet, but it's how it sounds in Cherokee. And then underneath that, in bold, it's broken down phonetically, because I don't think we could read the Cherokee very well. So that's the deal. And you want to just start at the top? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate that. Dr. Seeber, thank you for your time here. We look forward to the talkback. Those of you who are unfamiliar with what talkback is here in our congregation, in just a few minutes we'll be gathering back here in the sanctuary to talk with Dr. Seeber and ourselves, what we've learned, what we may want to ask, and continue to deepen our understanding of the subject that's here. So it's a delight. I would invite all of you to stay for that if it's possible for you. Dr. Seeber, your closing remarks, if you would, please.
As a closing, I just wanted to take a moment to put in our hearts the incredible journey that Indigenous people have been on through the last 500 years, and take a moment to recognize that the land that we live on and every place we've ever put our feet in this place is Indigenous land, and we're very lucky to be the stewards. And I hope that we are all inspired to dig deeper into the world around us, because the Indigenous world is one that is relational. There is not boxes or categories the way that we have them. Everything is about how you are related to everything else. Animals, plants, the climate, people around you, your house, your carpets. Everything is relational. And I think it's an incredible lesson for us every day to think about, instead of who we are in a series of lists or boxes, as who we are related to the world around us. And I find that to be a very grounding an important and beautiful way to see myself as part of the world.
Shall we stand now together and extinguish the chalice? While we extinguish this flame, we still carry in our hearts the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment until we are together again.